Hi, everyone. Welcome to Eichmann in Jerusalem, a report on the banality of evil. So, I want to begin our conversation, our 2 week conversation about Hannah Arendt's most controversial book with a bit of biography because I think people are coming to Arendt, coming to the text from different places. Some are opening for the first time, some are returning to her after the first time. Um, and I'm just going to take a moment and I'm going to make sure all of the microphones are off. Gesundheit. Okay, so Hannah Arendt was born in Linden, Hanover, Germany in 1906. At the age of 3, her family moved to Königsberg, which was then the capital of East Prussia, because her father was dying of syphilis, which he had contracted before she was born. He passed away when she was 7 years old, and she was raised by her mother, Martha. Arendt's life was interrupted when she was quite young by the First World War. She and her mother fled Königsberg to Berlin because Königsberg was not a safe place for Russian Jewish people to be at the time. They spent a year in Berlin with Martha's sister before going back to Königsberg, where Arendt was summarily kicked out of her Luisa Schule at around the age of 14 for leading a protest against a teacher who offended her one day during class. She was always very autodidactic. She did not like to get up early in the morning. She did not like to attend classes. She liked to spend her days in her father's library. By the time she was 14, 15 years old, she had read all of Kant, Karl Jasper's Psychology of Worldviews, taught herself ancient Greek and Latin. After she's kicked out of school, her mother sends her back to Berlin so that she can finish her studies and take her exams to go to university, to go to college. She passes her exams with a plume, and a childhood friend who she had learned Greek with wrote her a letter. Dear Hannah, you must come to Marburg. The rumors are true. Thinking has come to life. And of course, he was talking about the first lectures being offered at the University of Marburg by Martin Heidegger. Arendt goes to Marburg to take Heidegger's first seminars on Plato and Aristotle. I'm not going, this is not going to be a course on their relationship. Yes, they have had one. And I think it does become important to her thinking of evil. But we can talk about that later on and next week and the way she processes his own affiliation with the Nazi Party and actions during the war. Hannah Arendt spends about a year and a half with Martin Heidegger. She spends a semester at the University of Leipzig. She's studying with Edmund Husserl, one of the great fathers of phenomenology. And then she goes to the University of Heidelberg, where she writes her dissertation on the concepts of love in St. Augustine under the direction of Karl Jaspers. And so what this means is that she studied with the 2 German fathers of existentialism, Heidegger and Jaspers. And her understanding of existentialism and philosophy are going to inform the way that she approaches the theological problem of evil in this text as a philosophical problem. Like many people of her generation going through university, she actually studied theology and philosophy and ancient Greek. Augustine was a very popular at the time. At the age of 20, in 1923, she so 1920 in 1923 she published Love in St. Augustine and started working on her Habilitation, second book to secure a teaching position in Germany on Rahel Varnhagen, which was intended to be a kind of history of the relationship between German Romanticism and Jewish assimilation. She goes to Berlin. She's working on the second book, and she's working as a reporter and a journalist and a book reviewer. And she meets and falls in love with her first husband, Gunther Anders Stern. He's working on his habilitation on music and goes to the Institute for Social Research otherwise known as the Frankfurt School in Frankfurt at the Goethe-Universität, to work with Paul Tillich, the theologian, and the philosopher Theodor Adorno. After a year in Frankfurt, his second book is denied by Adorno. Adorno didn't like that he had been a student of Heidegger's, among other things. And they go back to Berlin. Everything changes on February 22nd, 1933, with the burning of the Reichstag. Hannah Arendt leaves her academic career, her promising academic career behind, and she says that I want nothing more to do with these intellectuals. And she decides that she wants to help her people. She starts doing work with Kurt Blumenfeld for the World Zionist Organization, collecting examples of anti-Semitic statements from newspapers and journals to be sent to world leaders and to be presented at the World Zionist Conference that summer, which of course in Prague, which never happened. At the same time, her mother has also come to Berlin, and together, hey, Berlin, I'll post a picture where she used to live. And she has turned their apartment into an underground stop to help communists fleeing the Gestapo. After doing this work for a few months, one day, walking out of the library, Hannah Arendt is arrested alongside her mother on their way to lunch. A librarian reported her asking, what does a young academic have, need? Why does a young academic have need for so many newspapers? Arendt's held by the Gestapo in the basement of Alexanderplatz for about 8 days. And according to her own accounts in her 1964 interview with Günter Gauss, she was essentially released because she was able to charm the young German guard put in charge of her care. In other words, she was released by pure luck and chance. The next day, she fled Germany through the Czech Republic to Geneva, where she spent a couple of months before finally going to Paris, where she would spend the next 8.5 years doing work only for Jewish organizations, working primarily with Youth Aliyah, helping Jewish youth prepare for emigration to then Palestine to work the land. She travels to Palestine in 1935. She decides she does not want to live there. She doesn't want anything to do with the kibbutzim, as she writes in a later letter to Mary McCarthy, and she goes back to Paris. By this time, she has divorced her first husband, met and fallen in love with her second husband, Heinrich Blücher, somebody who had no formal education, was a committed Marxist and communist, who had fought on the streets of Berlin with the Spartacus League, and who was not Jewish. Her mother hated him. They fell deeply in love very quickly, and shortly after they were married in the spring of 1940, they were both forced to report for internment. They were sent to different camps. Hannah Arendt was sent to Gurs in the south of France on the border of the Spanish Pyrenees. She was part of a mass escape along with some 50 other women. After 5.5 weeks, they forged papers, and Arendt walked out of the camp alone. She went to find her friend, Walter Benjamin, because she knew where he was. And after about 2 weeks of reading the newspapers and playing chess with him, word came that refugees were gathering in Montbon. She goes to Montbon, and one day, walking down the street, she runs into her husband by pure chance, pure luck, standing in the middle of the street where they sell mattresses and cigarettes. They acquire bicycles. Hannah Arendt's reading the detective novels of Simenon. Blücher is trying to read Kant for the first time, and they wait to receive papers. When they receive American emergency exit visas, they make, with the help of Arian Fry, they make their way to Marseille. Arendt travels to Lisbon for 6 months and eventually is able to board the SS Guinea. She arrives in the United States on May 22nd, 1941. She is 35 years old. She has $25 and she does not speak any English. She spends her first summer in America as a housekeeper, placed with a family through a self-help for refugees aid organization so that she can learn. I like to give the context of why she's writing about this. I'm also struck recounting it now, as I've done many times before, which I'm sure you can tell, that, even Arendt was an immigrant to the United States who chooses not to go back to Germany, which feels particularly striking in this political moment to me. Between 1941 and 1951, she's working on the origins of totalitarianism. And she publishes in 51, the same year that she receives American citizenship. In 1958, she publishes The Human Condition. Origins is the first major account of the rise of totalitarian movements in the 20th century of Hitlerism and Stalinism. And The Human Condition is a book that interrogates whether or not it is possible to save freedom in our modern world. In 1963, when she publishes Eichmann in Jerusalem, I think it's probably fair to say that the course of her career changes irrevocably. Arendt knew that she had to go cover the trial the moment she received word that Adolf Eichmann had been captured by agents of the Israeli Mossad in Argentina. When it was first published in The New Yorker, the text set all of the New York literary scene on fire. It still does so today. Arendt wanted to go for personal reasons, and I think it's also fair to say that she wanted to go for political reasons. She wanted to go because she had missed the Nuremberg trials and she wanted to see evil in the flesh. She wanted to see what evil looked like embodied. She wanted to physically stand face to face with somebody who had done evil. And she goes not as a philosopher, not as a theologian, but as a reporter, right? A report on the banality of evil. And she's engaging in the work of what I would describe as theoria, as theory, as a kind of classical form of political theory that we get in a text like Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. So when Günter Gauss says to her at the beginning of that interview on German national television, so, you're one of the most famous philosophers today, she says, no, I have to stop you. I'm not a philosopher. And he says, well, to me you are. And she says, well, I can't help you with that. If I'm anything, I'm a political theorist. So theoria was literally the theoria were a body that were appointed to go travel to a foreign land, observe what was happening, and then report back. And this is important to how Hannah Arendt's book is received, and it's important to the work that she does after the publication of Eichmann in Jerusalem. Because in her mind, as she ends up explaining in interviews and pieces, specifically the first footnote to the essay, Truth and Politics, comes to mind at the moment. She says that, I went, I observed what I experienced and I saw, and I shared it. And that's her definition of factual truth, which is the most fragile and vulnerable kind of truth that exists in our world. We all go out into the world, we experience the world, and we share our experience with another. When Arendt shared her experience in this book, her experience was not just negated, she was publicly canceled, as we might say today. Irving Howe and Lionel Abel brought all of New York Literary Society together at the Hotel Diplomat in downtown Manhattan And the poet Robert Lowell described